or
Looks good. Thank you.
okay. Let me minimize the cameras. Yeah, so I'm Gerard, and I'm working at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences as a postdoc researcher. But I did my postdoc, my PhD at Umeå University, which is also in Sweden. Sorry, I was trying to connect the laser that I think I managed now. Yeah. So yeah, and in this, so during my postdoc, we together with my collaborators in multiple U.S. institutions and Canada, we did this study on global methane emissions from running waters. Yeah, I mean, I always have some introductory slides that you probably already, I don't need to spend a lot of time with, but you all know that methane is a potent greenhouse gas that even though it has low concentrations, it has a very strong contribution to the global warming. And one thing that it has been a bit puzzling for the past decades is this, sorry, I'm struggling with the laser pointer. Now, yeah, no, yeah, so in the past, even though it seems that the concentrations paused in the early 2000s, there has been this increase in the past 10, 15 years. So an acceleration in the rate of growth of methane. And it seems to be partly driven by the increased production in freshwater. So for example, there's some studies showing that wetland methane emissions have increased due to global warming and increases in precipitation. So this understanding how freshwaters emit methane is an important research to constrain the global methane budget. And I guess you also are familiar with the global methane budget, but I'll just walk through so we are all in the same page. So here they show all the major sources of methane, fossil fuel and agriculture and waste that many of you are working with. Also the natural sources such as wetlands and other natural emissions. And here's where we have inland waters, rivers and lakes. And here they present two numbers. One is the bottom-up view. So this is the number that we can calculate from inventories or from measurements in ecosystems. And then the top-down view. So that's what, based on satellite observations, you can assign to different sources. And the agreement is pretty decent for, between bottom-up and top-down for fossil fuels and most of sources. But if you notice here, for like other natural emissions, the bottom-up number is 200 teragrams of methane, while the top-down number is 37. So there's a huge disagreement between what we ecologists measure in inland waters versus what the satellite people tell us that we should be emitting, basically. So this means that there's a lot of uncertainty for freshwater emissions. This is the budget from published in 2020, and now there's a new version coming out so hopefully it's public in the next couple of months, and I will show some updated numbers on this at the end of the talk. By the way, if anyone has a question or doubt, you should ask me, and I can try to clarify something on the way. So I'll delve a bit deeper into the freshwaters. So this is a review on freshwater emissions published last year. The citation comes out later. And we see that methane, depending on how you measure freshwater emissions, they account for around 50% of global methane emissions. And among those sources, when we look at the flux rate, so the rate of flux on any on all ecosystems, there's a huge variability, and particularly for rivers, there is this huge variability that spans 7 orders of magnitude from very low fluxes to very high fluxes in river ecosystems. So this is the review by Judy Rosentrater in 2021. So river methane emissions are poorly quantified. Until now, there was not a proper global estimate. It was just based on this global average value multiplied times the surface of rivers. So there was not a really good understanding of how rivers were emitting methane and the patterns in the globe. Now I will explain a bit into the ecology of methane in streams and rivers. Many of you know that methane is produced in anoxic conditions, through methanogenesis. It can be oxidized into food webs or to CO, or producing CO2, and it can be emitted to the atmosphere. So this would be the ecology in aquatic system. But rivers, in contrast to other ecosystems such as lakes or ponds, they are open systems. So this means that they receive a lot of materials from land, and then they export materials downstream. So this is what we call the ecology of streams and rivers, the methane ecology of streams and rivers. So this is important distinction with other freshwater systems, because rivers and streams, they are what we call open systems. They depend on external inputs, mostly from land. And an important point here is that how humans, we have been altering a lot the landscape, and that has a strong effect on methane cycling and emissions. So for example, nutrient inputs and organic carbon inputs into rivers from fertilizer or wastewater treatment plants. We have creating impoundments, which can also, one moment, and with impoundments and channels that really affect the water circulation in the river, and that can create more anoxic conditions. And of course, global warming can affect methane production in rivers. So to conclude this, methane in rivers is very variable with very high variability in flux rates, and that's because it reflects both internal and external processes. I'm very sorry, I'm a bit sick and I'm losing the voice. So methane as a greenhouse gas is a driver of global warming, but global warming is also an important factor that can exacerbate methane production in rivers. So this also means that there is a high potential for climate mitigation if we could reduce those methane emissions. So this study started. So this studies we started by summarizing all river methane published in the literature. This is an example of all the papers in river methane. And this was led by Professor Emily Stanley from the University of Wisconsin. And with this, we first produced the global river methane database. And here we spent 2 years meeting over Zoom, going through all the articles, extracting all data, and we did a lot of checks. And this is the only time that we finally met in person in a conference last year. So to present this global database, we collected more than 23,000 observations of concentrations. I'll speak a bit less because I'm losing my voice. So I apologize if it's not going as I expected. A lot of flux observations and a lot of ancillary data for rivers, such as discharge, temperature, nutrients. Here you have a map of where we have concentrations of fluxes or both. And we see also that, maybe I will not explain this plot, it's not important, but basically that in the past decade, it has been a huge increase of methane research with a lot of contributions into the literature of both concentrations and fluxes in the database. So now I will, after this more introduction, I will present a bit more the results of our work that was published in August in Nature about the patterns of global methane emissions from rivers. The goal of the study was to quantify global methane emissions, to unravel the spatial and the temporal patterns of those emissions, and also try to understand what are the drivers of river methane emissions. So to do this, we did global upscaling of methane river emissions. But for this, we use some global hydrographic layer that contains 3 million river reaches for small catchments in it, so we can capture the small streams as well. And daily model discharge, because discharge is an important parameter to model any process in rivers. And with this, we could derive the gas transfer velocity, which it gives an idea of how fast a gas can be exchanged with the atmosphere, and the surface area of the river. Then we collected a bunch of global spatial predictors for a wide range of biological, climatic, soil, and physical variables that could be important for methane ecology in rivers. Those are the most important variables that we could find in the model. And then we use machine random forest models to model methane concentrations based on those catchment properties. And we could run the model for every month, so we could capture the seasonality of methane concentrations. All the code to do this is in GitHub, and the data is public. So if you're interested in the analysis, it's public, and I'm happy to help if anyone is interested. So straight to the results. This would be the map of global methane concentrations in the world. Here I use the smaller hexes for dry areas because there are not many rivers in the deserts. But the main conclusion is that we find high concentrations in the tropics, but also in the polar areas. So and low concentrations in mountain ranges, such as the Andes here, for example, or the Appalachians here, or in the Himalayas. And also concentrations are not as high as in temperate areas compared to both the tropics or the polar areas. Now I will, those are concentrations, and then to estimate the fluxes, we multiply by this gas transfer velocity that gives us the velocity of how a gas moves from water to air. And with this, we could estimate the flux rates, which are shown in the study. The patterns are very similar. And with those flux rates multiplied by the water surface area, we can get the total emissions of a single river in the world. The data is summarized in this figure where I show for different latitudinal bands the total emissions that we get every year. And here is the seasonality so the total emissions for every month of the year. And we see that the fluxes are higher during summer in the tropics, in the polar areas, because there's no ice cover. While in the tropics, the seasonality captures more the wet and dry patterns in the tropics. And the total diffusive emissions that we can estimate is 13.4 teragrams of methane. So I spoke about diffusive fluxes, but methane, especially in aquatic systems, it can also be emitted via ebullitive fluxes. So those are very tricky to measure because they are bubbles released from the sediments. And many studies, they show they can be very, very important, as important as diffusive fluxes. So as we could, but in literature, there are very few observations, less than 500, around 500, and only 150 sites. So we couldn't do a global estimate, global patterns of ebullition. But in this database, we could measure, we could compare how both emissions pathways compare, and they are in similar magnitude. So this is a density plot of diffusion and ebullition, and they are also related to each other. So diffusive fluxes are linearly related in a log scale with ebullitive fluxes, which means that on average, we could assume that, and it's close to the one-to-one line, this dashed line here. So we assume that they contribute equally to a diffusive, which brings the total river flux to around 28 teragrams of methane per year. We could also then use the machine learning model output to understand what are the most important variables. And those are the top important variables in the model. And the inner, this wiggly line here is the partial dependence of the random forest model. So it basically tells you that methane concentrations decrease with gas transfer velocity, or for example, methane concentrations increase with peatland cover. So I will not go in detail with all of this, but I will show it together with a conceptual model that, some of our researchers developed before on what should be the main drivers of methane in rivers. And we expect that geomorphology, so if a river is turbulent or not, is an important factor, same as hydrology, the river size. The temperature is an important regulator, and also the supply of organic matter and nutrients, which at the end can control a lot the potential for methane production. So we see those variables. For example, organic matter supply is reflected in the soil organic carbon, soil respiration, population density. The hydrology is also reflected in the groundwater table depth, or the geomorphology of the catchment, such as elevation, river slope, or the gas transfer velocity, as well as temperature. It's an important driver. So as a summary, there are three major sets of controls of river methane emissions. One is these large-scale climatic controls that can regulate the production and availability of methane in rivers. So the tropics and the polar areas, which are areas with a lot of water, and that can determine whether methane can be produced. Then there's also this catchment, finer catchment properties. So if a river is turbulent or not, or the river slope or the elevation, that can regulate methane at more like river reach scales. And there's still a finer spatial variability that many studies show that it's very variable, that it's not captured in this model, because we are still working at river, few kilometer scale of rivers. So I wanted to dig a bit more into temperature, because one of the results is this striking high emissions, both in the tropics and in the polar areas. So the polar areas are cold, and if methane production is very temperature dependent, they should have low fluxes. So I just saw a comment. Yes, so I just see a question from Susie that if eutrophic bodies could be emitting more methane, and that is correct. Yes. I will show some data on this now. So going back to temperature, so we see that polar areas should emit less methane if it's very temperature dependent, which there are many studies showing that methane. So this is a study also published in Nature 10 years ago that showed that this is the flux of methane in different aquatic systems, lakes, wetlands, and rice paddies. Scales very well with temperature, so it has a very high energy activation. That means that small increase in temperature increases a lot the flux of methane in those aquatic systems. The flux to the atmosphere, not production, the flux directly to the atmosphere. So based on this on this framework, we should expect very low emissions in the boreal and Arctic areas. And this is because, as I said, that it's very temperature dependent. And in contrast, when we do the same analysis in all the rivers that we have a lot of observations, so those are rivers with more than 30 observations, we find that rivers have a very weak temperature dependent. It's the line is close to, it's close to zero. And this would be the slope if it would be similar to lakes and reservoirs, lakes and wetlands, as of this line. Or another way to put in is this activation energy. So this would be the slope of those lines, and we see that rivers behave very different from rice paddies, wetlands, and lakes. So that means that rivers don't have a very strong temperature dependent compared to lakes and wetlands. And the reason to explain this is that temperature, it is a major for rivers is not a major control, because rivers are so controlled by external inputs, in contrast to wetlands, rice paddies, and lakes. So that means that rivers depend so much on methane inputs from adjacent land, from wetlands produced in the soils, as well as the supply of organic matter and nutrients from land. So if everything is equal, yes, methane would increase, methane production in rivers would increase, but there are so many things changing due to humans and climate change that the final result of methane emissions with climate change it's more multifaceted and it's a bit more complex than just temperature. So now we could also in this database explore the role of humans in methane emissions in rivers. So first of all, methane was already in population. A human population was already an important predictor of methane in the model. Also, global warming, even though it will not directly increase methane emissions, indirectly it might, because, for example, as I mentioned, in the Arctic, it will have shorter ice covers, higher organic carbon supply from terrestrial ecosystems, higher precipitation and high runoff, and all of these will have an added effect on methane emissions from those areas, even despite of temperature. So in this data set, as I was saying, we could also explore other observations in the database. And we have a lot of observations from many human systems that we had to exclude for the modeling because they were not captured by the predictors, the landscape predictors that we used. And many of those observations shown here in color, and this vertical line would be the average methane concentration in the database. We see that many of those characteristics, such as sites affected by fracking, point sources, so wastewater treatment plants, downstream of dams, ditches, canals, all those sites have much higher concentrations than average river methane concentrations. So this means that many of those human influenced sites have probably higher methane emissions than a natural river, let's say. I was reading the question, but I will answer that later as it's not part of this slide. It's important to point out that our estimate of the role of humans is still conservative because those observations were not included in the model, and there's future research to be done in this aspect, and a lot of opportunities for technological applications. So to conclude, these global patterns of methane emissions, we can explain them in two ways, and it's that methane in rivers occurs in the intersection of two important drivers. So that's when you have high organic matter and waterlogged soils. And this can occur in two locations. So for example, in the tropics, you have high rates of organic carbon production, and in the Arctic, you have low rates of organic carbon decomposition. And in both cases, you have a high content of organic matter supplied to rivers. And the waterlogged soils occur in the tropics because you have high precipitation and in the Arctic low evapotranspiration. So those two things can explain why this global pattern of methane concentrations in rivers. So going back to the global methane budget, we are working now on the global methane budget from covering the years 2010 and 2020. I don't know if many of you are involved in it as well. It should be released anytime soon. And I will go back to this number because this is the bottom-up view from a few years ago, and this is the top-down view, and those would be the updated numbers. So the updated number from the bottom-up view is 200, and the top-down view, after changing some methodologies, it goes up to 160. So the gap between estimates, between top-down and bottom-up estimates has been strongly reduced. And this is mostly because there has been a lot of new work on freshwater emissions, not only this study on rivers, but there's also new spatially explicit estimate for lakes and reservoirs. And we also did this first quantification of double counting emissions from wetlands versus lakes and rivers, because wetland ecosystems measure some fluxes that might actually belong to rivers or vice versa. Also, an important point also of methane is you are familiar with the global methane pledge that methane emissions should reduce substantially in the next decade. And here I just wanted to emphasize how river emissions are in the magnitude of wastewater treatment plants, which means that there's a high potential of climate mitigation from water management, let it be river restoration, because removing dams or avoiding nutrient inputs into rivers could reduce emissions, managing reservoirs, and of course, wastewater treatment plant management. Sorry, I was reading through the questions, but maybe I'm almost at the end and then I can take them. So the next steps, at least in river research, is this. Yeah, one of them would be to constrain the WT fluxes because they are very high, large fluxes, but very variable and very little measurements. This is one of the largest unknowns right now. There's still a large unexplained variability, or roughly 50%, because it's so variable still. And this is because maybe we need to go from a smaller, finer spatial scale. We were working at watershed scales, which is still a lot of work globally, but maybe going to river reach scale will help in developing more predictive, powerful models. So for this, we need better hydrological data sets that are currently in development to capture the small streams. And it's important, and I'm also very interested in exploring how we could and interventions to reduce river emissions for climate mitigation purposes. So with this, I will end my talk, and I'm happy to have questions. And I apologize a lot. I lost my voice in the middle of the talk.
Oh, no worries. Thank you so much. This was really interesting. And we already have several questions coming in. Could we stop the recording so we can move to the Q&A?